All right, folks, it is Thanksgiving week. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We're thankful that you're watching the show. Thanks to 20,000 subscribers, a new milestone that we just crossed. Completely insane. I think we're at like over 2 million views in the lifetime of the channel, and more than 50% of that has come from from January of 2024 onward. So thanks everybody for liking, subscribing, leaving comments, telling your friends, sharing the content everywhere. Hopefully you're getting some value out of the things that we talk about every week. So thanks.
Yeah, first and foremost, 20,000. That's a big accomplishment. I'd like to thank my mom, not because she made me, but because she probably watches the show on repeat constantly.
100%.
I hope so. If not, Mom, what are you doing?
100%.
Big deal. We appreciate every single one of you. It's been nothing but fun for us to hop on here. And I don't even know what we talk about anymore, Jacob. It's just we black out and then there's an episode and people are like, we love it. I like that.
Yeah, well, make sure you guys thank Jason's mom in the comments down below. So let's get right into it. So pretty straightforward. When people talk about, we've been talking about CMMC, it's going to be in contract. CMMC's coming. CMMC's here. Everything's going on. Let's just get down to brass tacks. How will you know what CMMC level you need and who decides what CMMC level you need? How do they decide what CMMC level? How does it work on the ground level? That's what we're going to talk about today.
You get a contract, right? That's how it works.
That's basically the answer. And the long and short of it is, it will be in your solicitation. The DoD will say in the contract solicitation that in order to take award of this contract and comply with the CMMC contract clause, you must achieve and maintain the following CMMC status level. So be sure to check out our episode on the proposed version of the 48 CFR CMMC rule. We'll link that down below. That covers the details of the proposed rule that covers the language in the contract solicitation and the contract clause that implements the policy that is documented in the 32 CFR rule. We'll have a link to our webinar where we go into all the details of everything that's in the rule. But for this episode, we're just talking about what is that going to look like, and more importantly, how will they decide, and how do you move forward and strategize based off what they say in the 32 CFR rule. So according to the 32 CFR rule, the direct quote, CMMC program requirements will be identified as solicitation and contract requirements, and contractors will be required to meet the stated CMMC requirements when applicable at or above the level identified. So like we said, per the 48 CFR rule, there's going to be two things that you're going to see. The first is a contract provision. The second is a contract clause. So a lot of people refer to these all as clauses. Technically, they're different. A provision makes you aware of the thing that you need to comply with. The clause is the thing that you need to comply with. So for example, you must comply with DFARS 7012 requirements. DFARS 252-2000 or 252-204 7008 makes you aware of the clause requirements in 7012. You must comply with DFARS 7020. The DFARS provision 252-204 7019 makes you aware of the requirements in 7020. You must comply with the CMMC contract clause 252-204 7021. You will be made aware of those requirements through a provision that does not have a number yet. The placeholder is 252-204 7YYYY. It's a 7,000 number. We'll see what the number is going to be. So as they go on to say in the 32 CFR rule, the DoD reserves the right to define the criteria for selection of the CMMC assessment requirement, just as it defines all other requirements for inclusion in a solicitation. So you will know, based on the solicitation, through these provisions and clauses, which CMMC status level you need to achieve as a condition of contract award. Simple enough, but the bigger question is, how will they decide? What is the process that goes into determining the status level that is in the solicitation once you see it?
My biggest question is that if I get a solicitation, and let's say that solicitation says that my company, just for this one particular contract, has a lower level of compliance requirements, is it safe for me to assume that that is the level that I'm going to have to maintain as the baseline, right? Like, so for example, I get a contract requirement that says that I am required to have CMMC level 2 self-assessment, Jacob. Should I think that self-assessment is going to be my benchmark because of my company for the entirety of all the contracts that I do with the DoD? And then how many companies are going to get suckered into that, thinking that I've gotten the self-assessment done, not really thoroughly preparing, and then going to have to do an assessment to meet a contract, like after the fact, right? So like the rollout comes out, I get a self-assessment for my company. I'm sitting here, everything's fine. I've put the 110 in. We know I've done everything perfectly. But then the rollout finishes and another contract comes up. I want to bid on it. It's work that I've been guaranteed before, right? Or that I've been performing work on before, but now there's an assessment requirement and the PALT time is not long enough, or the PALT time is not long enough. You know what I mean? Like the questions like that, those are the things that rattle my brain. Like, where are we going to find these loopholes or these different type of scenarios where people are going to get caught up and they're going to trip over their own feet and then they're going to end up in a really bad situation because they, like, look forward.
Yeah. So the rule actually talks about this briefly, sort of how to strategize around what's going on. So, quickly, if anybody has the question, the rule says, the direct quote from the rule is, once attained, the CMMC self-assessment or certification can be used to support any number of proposals or solicitations. So if you have your self-assessment and you're only bidding on solicitations that require self-assessment, you're good to go, level 1 or level 2. If you have your CMMC level 2 C3 PAO status, you only need to get it once in order to bid on however many solicitations have the CMMC level 2 C3 PAO external certification requirement. But the rule goes on to say, when a contractor or subcontractor responds to multiple solicitations, that contractor should complete the highest assessment level among them for the assessment scope defined for use in performance of the contract. So you have to essentially hedge your bets on what level do you think you're going to bid on. If you only have a level 2 self-assessment as your CMMC status, and you want to bid on something that's going to require CMMC level 2 certification via C3PAO, then you have to go for the C3PAO certification as sort of your high watermark of what you need. This is kind of why we see the policy from the primes telling everybody, go get your C3PAO certification assessment, because we want you to be ready in the event that we need to flow this data down to you, even though we don't currently know if that's actually what we're going to do in the future. So maybe we can talk about how they're going to decide what the level is going to be. And I think that will illuminate the reason why you have to hedge on the side of a higher certification level if you have any plans in the future of potentially needing to bid on, or you want to bid on, work with these assessment requirements. So who decides what CMMC level goes into a solicitation? How do they decide? So to select a CMMC level for procurement, this is in the words of the 32 CFR rule itself. To select a CMMC level for a procurement, program managers and requiring activities, so DoD program managers, will identify the applicable CMMC level using the factors included in section 170.5 paragraph B 1 through 5. So in that specific section, 170.5. If you go to section 170.5, it's called policy. And under paragraph B, it says, DoD program managers will select the CMMC status that will apply to a procurement with the following 5 criteria. 1, the criticality of the associated mission capability. 2, the type of acquisition program or technology. 3, the threat of loss of the FCI or CUI to be shared or generated. 4, impacts from exploitation of information security deficiencies. And 5, other relevant policies and factors. Those are the 5 criteria that program managers are going to use to determine the CMMC status requirement that you must achieve when it goes out in the solicitation for you to bid on. And so this is all happening before the solicitation hits the street, right? This is not happening after the solicitation hits the street. This is not saying we're going to put out an opportunity for people to bid on, and then we'll let you know afterwards what level you need to comply with. They're telling you via the solicitation what level you need to take award of that contract, and they've determined what that level will be beforehand via these 5 criteria.
Do you think that there's going to be like scenarios where in the initial rollout of the program, a PM chooses to, I don't know, assign CMMC level 2 self-assessment to a contract just for the first year of the contract, and then maybe in a renewal period require you to have that authorization by then? Do you think that the kind of what I'm getting at is, do you think there's going to be some kind of leeway from the PM that's going to be granted to the OSC that says that, hey, you've got a process to go through and you don't need this right now, but we know that you're going to need it, right? Like a ramp up period that's ancillary to the DoD's ramp up period.
Yeah, possibly. And this is really the key takeaway. Next week, we're going to dive into the details of the phased rollout and the degree to which DoD has discretion over which levels happen in which phases and why it's more important to focus on what your customers are asking for rather than what the DoD thinks the rollout is going to be. However, if we look at the 5 factors that they use in the policy to determine a CMMC status level, I don't think that the criticality of the associated mission capability is going to be different during the initial solicitation and then a year later. It's either critical or it's not, right?
That's what I want to bait you into saying is like,
Yeah.
essentially, like, it's not going to make what's important next week is not going to be what's important today is going to be important next week. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
it's important now. It's important in the option period. It's important 6 months before we're having this discussion around what the solicitation should be, right?
I just was having conversations with people at an industry show recently, and the conversations were centered around something like that. And I was like, I don't think that that's you and kind of the same argument or the same justification that you gave. I just don't think that changes, right?
Yeah.
The contract's not going to get any more important over a year. It's not going to mature to
right. For instance, does the impact of exploitation as a result of an information security deficiency, is the impact less in 1 year than it is right now, right? So if the impact is there and the criticality is there and the threat is there and the type of technology is there, then why would it be different now than it would be in 12 months? Now, here's the thing though, right? The whole key takeaway here is you don't know the criteria that's being used to determine a CMMC status level before the solicitation hits the street. And once it's in the solicitation, you have no ability to change it. And so as a result, it doesn't really matter what the criteria is if you will never know what the criteria is. You just have to respond to whatever is going to be in the solicitation. So if you believe that you're downstream from the kind of programs, the kind of threats, the kind of technologies, the kind of acquisitions that broadly would be included in a CMMC level 2 certification requirement, then you have to assume that's what's going to show up in the solicitations because you don't know what the DoD guidance is. You don't know what the milestone decision authority analysis is inside some program office somewhere. You're just not privy to that information. Interesting note, though, on these criteria that they use to determine the level. So number 4 was impacts from exploitation of information security deficiencies. In the proposed rule, they said potential impacts from the exploitation of information security deficiencies. And they have a note in the rule that says the DoD did agree with comments to rephrase number 4 to delete a reference to the quote potential for impact from exploitation of information security deficiencies, which likely cannot be effectively determined. So they aren't judging the level of solicitation based off the potential impact. They're judging the solicitation level based off of what they have determined will be the impact. So these are much more concrete in the eyes of the DoD, saying if this is compromised, there will be an impact, which means if you think that a compromise to the information that you work with on missiles, weapon systems, other forms of technical information would have an impact, they probably have also said there will be an impact, which means you have to anticipate that you will need certification assessments rather than self-assessments.
The common argument's always been not if, but when an event affects a company in the DIB, right? And this isn't like a case of evaluating risk and, realizing that I don't live on a tectonic plate and earthquakes aren't a huge issue for me, right? Like I live on the East Coast, and the last time that we saw earthquake was actually 5 years ago. So now my point's actually null and void and invalid. But did you get what I'm saying? Like, it's just a likelihood. Like, I'm not going to worry about a snowstorm if I live in Dubai, unless it's man-made, right? And so, like, I think that's one of the cases when you're in the DIB. The impact of an event is when, not if, it's when.
Yeah.
Like, and how well you can mitigate it.
Yeah. And so, we hear a lot from people who say, oh, well, we're probably going to be able to self-assess. And then you ask them what they do, and they say, we work on really awesome laser stuff, or we work on very specialized satellite payloads, or we work on guidance systems for missile technology. And be like, I don't know how to tell you this. I don't think you're going to be able to self-assess, because if you were to evaluate that through the eyes of the program manager and these 5 criteria, they're probably going to say that you need a certification assessment. And this happens doubly so if you're on the other side of the primes, because the rule says people should reach out to the government PMs that they're working with and try to figure out what's going on and have this communication back and forth. You might not have that avenue of communication if you're not a direct awardee. Your avenue of communication goes through Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop, Boeing. And they have already said the high water mark is level 2 certification in the event that we need to flow the data to you. Something that we talked about on the webinar, something we've talked about on the show in the past, is you're essentially, there's this phenomenon that I'm starting to call level 2 lock-in, if you will, in the sense that the wording in the rule, the wording in DoD policy says, if there is a C3PAO external certification CMMC level 2 requirement on the contract between the DoD and the prime, and the DoD sends you CUI from that contract, and they had the requirement for external certification, you have the requirement for external certification. So the ability for you to thread the needle on self-assessment, whether you look at the specific criteria for selecting a level, or you look at the criteria for level 2 lock-in, if you will, is just increasingly unlikely. So let's just talk about very quickly. They spend a lot of time in the rule talking about the policy guidance that they're going to give to the acquisition workforce. And I think this just supports the idea that you won't know how the level is going to be determined, and you won't know how the level is determined before the solicitation is on the street and you have to submit your bid. So they say, in support of 32 CFR Part 170 CMMC program final rule, the DoD issued policy guidance to its program managers and acquisition workforce to identify the appropriate CMMC requirement in solicitations and contracts. And they go on to say, the DoD will continue to issue policy guidance to program managers to clarify which programmatic indicators should be considered for selecting the most appropriate information safeguarding requirement and associated CMMC assessment requirement for any given solicitation. I don't know if that guidance is going to be made public. I don't know if they would want it to be made public. For instance, the criteria that they use for CMMC level 3 is a very closely guarded secret, if you will. The sensitivity of these critical information systems, critical programs, critical weapon systems, critical capabilities, this criticality list is not something that is public. It's probably classified. I have no idea. But they aren't advertising their decision matrix. They aren't advertising the types of things that would make it sensitive or not for level 3 or level 2 external certification, level 2 self-assessment. So you have to hedge your bets, because if the type of work that you do lines up with this type of stuff and you're planning on self-assessing and suddenly you need an external assessment, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And we don't want that to happen to people.
It's kind of funny that you kind of mentioned bets there, because I kind of thought about parlays when I thought about the reason why I saw the smirk, the reason why the DoD might not issue out that guidance, right? Because like people would look at it as a parlay and they would think that you're not cashing out DoD because this checklist that you issued saying that this is the level of CMMC that's required on this contract, you didn't hit all the bets, right? You didn't hit the over on this or that, right? And so that gives an argument. There's a criteria there that the public can use to justify the argument against why the criteria is there. Just causes a big hiccup and a headache and a traffic jam when coming to issuing solicitations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, degenerate gambling multi-leg parlays are for NFL football and horse racing, not for the future sustainability and profitability of your defense contracting business. So business is about taking risks, but just know that you can see the factors that the DoD will use in determining CMMC status level requirements in solicitations starting very soon. And when you do look at those criteria, it's more likely that they're going to require external certifications rather than self-assessments at CMMC level 2. But next week, we're going to talk about the phased rollout, yet another thing that people are betting on. And I think when we dive into the details as explained in the final rule, hopefully that will change people's risk calculus in terms of the types of gambles that they're making and when they're going to make them. But that's for next week. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We'll see you then.
Happy Thanksgiving. See you next week.